All right, welcome to a deep dive that, well, this one is going to take us straight into existentialism.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah. And the really cool thing is we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry for this one,
Oh, nice.
which is, awesome because you're into philosophy.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
this will be great.
Perfect source.
And the thing that I think is so interesting about existentialism is it's not just like some dusty old philosophy book, right? It like pops up everywhere.
It really
You
does.
see it in art, you see it in literature,
Yeah.
politics, even therapy.
Right.
What do you think it is about existentialism that gives it that kind of staying power? Why does it keep coming back?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
And it's one that honestly, like even philosophers who've been studying it for years kind of wrestle with.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the thing about existentialism is it's surprisingly difficult to define.
Hmm.
It's not like a neat system with one founder, or a single set of rules. It's more like a family of ideas or even like a mood or an attitude towards being.
Okay, so instead of thinking of it like a philosophy textbook,
Yeah.
it's more like what, like a philosophical mixtape
I like that.
with like different artists and styles, but all kind of exploring similar themes?
Exactly, exactly. And you've got some big names on that mixtape, You've got Sartre, Beauvoir, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche.
Wow, yeah. Heavy hitters.
But don't worry, you don't need to be like a philosophy whiz to understand the main ideas here.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
But let's get into those ideas then, right? Like, what are some of those, I guess, core existentialist ideas that are still resonating with people today?
Mm.
Because I feel like I keep hearing about existentialism,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure I really have a good grasp on it,
Sure, yeah.
What is it really about?
Well, it's interesting to think about, like, when existentialism really came into its own, it was during a time of just massive upheaval. Think about the impact of, like, science challenging these long-held beliefs, the
Whoa.
world wars, the atomic bomb, all these things that were happening.
It's huge, yeah.
And they really shook people's sense of meaning and purpose.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, because it feels like we're kind of living through similar times now, right?
Yeah.
With so much uncertainty and just constant change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that's why existentialism keeps popping up. It
Yeah.
speaks to that feeling of like searching for meaning
Mm-hmm.
in a world that feels like it's constantly shifting under our feet.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, existentialism is very much a response to that feeling, of like anxiety and the sense that our old ways of understanding the world just aren't enough anymore.
Mhm.
And this brings us to a concept that you might have heard of before, nihilism.
Oh, yeah. Nihilism. Isn't that the idea that like nothing matters?
Yeah.
Like we're all just these tiny specks in this vast, meaningless universe?
Exactly.
It always seemed kind of, I don't know, depressing to me, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a heavy idea.
Yeah.
But you've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
Nihilism argues that life is inherently meaningless. But here's the key difference.
Okay.
Existentialism doesn't just accept nihilism, it grapples with it.
So it's not just like, okay, nothing matters, let's all just give up.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's about figuring out how to live a meaningful life, even when you acknowledge that there might not be this, like, inherent meaning baked into the universe.
So it's less about wallowing in despair and more about figuring out how to live a good life, even if we have to kind of define good for ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
And this is where another, like, key aspect of existentialism comes in.
Right.
It's deeply rooted in lived experience,
Okay.
not just, like, abstract theory.
I see.
It cares about how we actually feel and act in the world, not just what some philosopher thought about it centuries ago.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like you can't really understand love just by reading a definition in a dictionary, right?
Exactly.
You have to actually experience it.
I see what you mean. Yeah, existentialism would agree with you there.
Okay.
It's all about confronting those real, often messy experiences, and that's where the real knowledge lies.
I'm starting to get why existentialism might appeal to people who are, looking for answers in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
But it also sounds like a lot of pressure, to be honest.
Yeah.
If there's no, like, preset meaning, does that mean we're completely on our own to create it?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's where the famous phrase, existence precedes essence, comes into play.
Okay, existence precedes essence.
Yeah, it basically means we're not born with a fixed self.
Right.
We create our essence through our choices and actions.
So it's kind of like we're all works in progress, always shaping who we are.
That's a great way to put it. It's not like you're born, like, brave or kind.
Hmm.
You become those things through your actions.
Okay, so, I mean, if we're the authors of our own stories, that seems pretty exciting.
It is.
But it also means we have a lot of responsibility.
It
Like,
does.
there's no blaming our parents or bad luck if we don't like how things turn out.
Yeah, you own it.
It makes me think of that Dostoevsky character, the underground man, who was so obsessed with his own freedom that he, like, rebelled against everything.
Ah, yes. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, a classic example.
Yeah.
He just embodies that struggle with freedom, that
Yeah.
anxiety of having to choose, that fear that our freedom might actually lead us to, like, self-destruction even.
That's heavy stuff. But, I mean, existentialism doesn't just leave us in that state of anxiety, right?
No,
Doesn't it offer some kind of, like, hope or direction, too?
absolutely. Yeah, recognizing the weight of responsibility is just one part of it.
Okay.
Existentialism is also about transformation,
Okay.
about living authentically despite all the uncertainty and anxiety.
So what does it really mean to live authentically in an existentialist sense? Is it about, like, following your passion and ignoring what everyone else thinks?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. For existentialists, authenticity is about confronting our tendency to just, like, conform to social expectations.
Right.
What Heidegger called the they.
The they, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that a lot of us are living inauthentic lives, just following the crowd instead of forging our own paths.
So it's more about being true to yourself, even if it means, like, going against the grain and facing some discomfort.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That can be tough.
It can. It definitely takes courage and self-awareness.
Yeah.
Because existentialism recognizes that we're constantly bombarded with this pressure to conform, right?
Right.
And true freedom lies in resisting that pressure
Hmm.
and making choices that align with our values.
It's like recognizing the script that society kind of hands us,
Mm-hmm.
but choosing to write our own story instead.
Exactly.
But how do we even know what our story is? How do we figure out what our values are and what feels authentic to us?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's where we'll pick up in part 2.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. All right, we'll be right back.
So welcome back to our deep dive into existentialism.
Yeah, I'm ready for part 2.
All right. So before the break, we were talking about, figuring out what feels authentic to us.
Right, how to actually be authentic.
Yeah, which is, that's a really crucial question.
It is.
Right. It's all well and good to say be authentic.
Yeah.
But how do we even, like, begin to do that when, like, the world is constantly telling us who we should be and what we should do?
Right, exactly. Like, where do you even start with that?
Yeah, and that's where existentialism gets, like, really practical.
Okay.
It's not just about these abstract ideas. It's about actually, like, navigating the world and making choices in our everyday lives,
Right. Right.
And one of the, like, key tools it gives us is this concept of boundary situation.
Boundary situations? Okay, those sound kind of intense.
Yeah.
What exactly are they?
So think about, like, experiences like illness, loss, major life changes.
Okay, big stuff.
Yeah, those moments when, like, your everyday world is just shaken up and you're forced to confront those big questions about life and death, you know?
Right, I'm starting to see what you mean.
Yeah.
Those are the times when you really have to think about what matters to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Existentialism suggests that these boundary situations, even though they can be really difficult,
Yeah.
they can actually be opportunities for growth.
Oh,
They
interesting.
force us to, like, confront what's truly important and make choices that align with our deepest values.
So instead of just going through life on autopilot,
Mm-hmm.
these challenging experiences can kind of wake us up and push us towards a more authentic way of being.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And this ties back to the idea of freedom and responsibility that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
We might not be able to control everything that happens to us,
Of course.
but we always have some choice in how we respond.
Yeah, okay, I see the connection.
Yeah.
But it's still a bit daunting, to be honest, to think about all that responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like Sartre said, we're condemned to be free.
Yes. That is a famous Sartre quote.
Right.
And it highlights, like, the paradoxical nature of freedom, right? We crave it.
Yeah.
But it also comes with this, like, heavy burden of responsibility.
But how do we even know what the right choices are? If there's no, like, inherent meaning, doesn't that make every choice kind of arbitrary?
That's a common misconception about existentialism, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's not about saying that all choices are equal or that there's no such thing as right and wrong.
Okay.
Instead, it emphasizes the importance of creating our own ethical framework.
So instead of relying on some external set of rules,
Right.
we have to figure out what our own moral compass looks like. But I mean, how do we even start to do that?
Well, existentialism suggests that our values should be grounded in our lived experience, in our understanding of what it means to be human.
Hmm.
It encourages us to ask ourselves these tough questions about what we believe in, what we stand for, and what kind of impact we want to have on the world.
So it's like instead of just blindly following tradition or what other people tell us,
Right.
we have to really think for ourselves and figure out what we believe in.
Exactly.
That sounds like a lifelong process.
You're absolutely right. Authenticity isn't a destination. It's a journey.
Huh?
It's about constantly questioning, reflecting, and making choices that align with our, evolving sense of self.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also sounds like there could be a lot of internal conflict along the way.
Oh, for sure.
What if our desires clash with our values?
Yeah.
Or what if we make choices that we later regret?
That's all part of the human experience. Existentialism doesn't shy away from the messiness of life.
Okay.
It acknowledges that we'll make mistakes, that we'll sometimes act in bad faith, as Sartre called it,
Right, bad faith.
and that we'll constantly be grappling with these, complex questions.
Bad faith. You mentioned that earlier, but I'm still not quite sure what that means.
Right. Yeah, it's an important concept in existentialism.
Okay.
So Sartre used bad faith to describe those moments when we try to, deny our own freedom and responsibility. It's like when we pretend we don't have a choice.
Oh,
Or when we blame our circumstances for our actions instead of, owning up to them.
so it's a way of avoiding the anxiety that comes with freedom by pretending that we're not really free.
Exactly. And it can take many forms,
Okay.
For example, conforming to social expectations without really questioning them.
Right.
Or playing a role that doesn't feel authentic to us.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like hiding from ourselves and our own potential.
Precisely. And existentialism encourages us to confront bad faith, to acknowledge our freedom and responsibility, even when it's uncomfortable.
So it's about being honest with ourselves
Yeah.
and making choices that align with our values, even when it's hard.
Yeah, that's the challenge.
So that brings up another question for me. We keep talking about values, but
Mhm.
doesn't existentialism say that there are no objective values?
Yeah,
If everything is subjective, how can we even talk about right and wrong?
that's a really important point, and it gets to the heart of existentialist ethics.
Okay.
It's true that existentialism rejects the idea of a pre-existing moral code that applies to everyone. But that doesn't mean that ethics is irrelevant
Okay.
or that anything goes.
So if there's no universal rule book,
Mhm.
how do we figure out how to act ethically?
Well, existentialism suggests that we create our own ethical framework
Yeah.
based on our understanding of what it means to be human and our commitment to living authentically.
Hmm.
It emphasizes the importance of taking responsibility for our choices
Well, right.
and considering the impact our actions have on others.
So it's not about following a set of rules, but rather developing a sense of moral responsibility that guides our actions.
Exactly. And that responsibility extends beyond just our own individual lives.
Okay.
Existentialism recognizes that we're all interconnected.
Right.
And that our choices have rippled effects on the world around us.
That makes sense. If we believe in freedom and authenticity for ourselves, we should also be working towards creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to live freely and authentically.
That's a great insight. And it brings us to the social and political implications of existentialism,
Okay.
which we'll explore in more detail in part 3.
Welcome back to our deep dive. So we left off talking about the social and political side of existentialism.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big one.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear more about that. How do those ideas actually play out in the real world?
Right. Well, it's a crucial part of this whole philosophy.
Okay.
While existentialism really emphasizes individual freedom and responsibility,
Yeah.
it doesn't just stop there,
So it's not just about me and my own choices. It connects to something bigger.
Exactly. Yeah. It recognizes that we don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
Our choices, our freedom, it's all shaped by the social and political structures around us, the systems we live in.
Okay, so it's like acknowledging that our individual lives are kind of intertwined with these larger systems and institutions, right? The things that shape our world.
Precisely. And A lot of existentialist thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir, Frantz Fanon, they went even further.
Huh.
They argued that true individual freedom is impossible without social justice and equality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it's hard to even talk about like personal freedom when people are being denied basic rights or opportunities because of things like their race, gender, or social class.
Exactly. And this is where existentialism becomes like a really powerful tool for social critique and activism.
Hmm.
It challenges us to look beyond just our own individual experiences
Oh.
and confront those systems of oppression that are actually limiting human freedom and flourishing,
So it's not just about like reflecting on our own lives and choices. It's
Yeah.
also about working to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to actually live authentically and freely.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the big picture.
That sounds like a pretty tall order, to be honest.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
But existentialism reminds us that we're not just these like passive bystanders.
Hmm.
We have the power to choose, to act, to make a difference, even if it's hard.
This is making me think about how existentialism connects to some of those like huge issues we're facing today, like climate change, for example.
Interesting.
It seems like that sense of individual responsibility could be really important in tackling a problem that feels so, I don't know, overwhelming.
That's a great observation. Existentialism has a lot to say about our relationship with the environment, too. It challenges us to recognize that we're not separate from nature, but a part of it.
Right.
And it reminds us that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for like the entire ecosystem.
So instead of just focusing on like our own comfort and convenience, we have to think about the impact our choices have on future generations and the planet as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these ideas could be really helpful in tackling these like complex global issues.
Yeah.
But it still feels a bit, I don't know, daunting to think about actually changing the world. What can one person really do?
Right. And that's where existentialism's emphasis on action comes in.
Okay.
It reminds us that even small acts of resistance, even individual choices made with like awareness and intention, they can contribute to positive change.
So it's about focusing on what we can control, on making those choices that align with our values, and trusting that those actions, however small they might seem, can actually have a ripple effect.
Exactly, yeah. And it's about finding ways to connect with other people who share those values, to build movements, to create collective action.
Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It's been great talking about this.
I feel like I'm finally starting to, I don't know, grasp the essence of existentialism.
That's great.
It's not just about this like abstract philosophy up in the clouds. It's about how we actually live our lives,
Yeah, absolutely.
how we relate to others, how we engage with the world around us.
It's very grounded, yeah.
It's been a truly fascinating deep dive, I have to say.
Thanks.
I have a feeling I'll be thinking about these ideas for a long time to come.
Me too.
Thanks for guiding us through this journey.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, existence precedes essence. What will you create?